This is actually a story of an event that more or less happened last week. It hit the New York Times and all the other media last week, but you know, it's it's still going on. I mean, you know, I thought it was just going to like that, but right-wing radio is and you know, right-wing publications are still all over this. Here's what's going on. The Constitution says no person except a natural-born citizen shall be eligible, comma, or a citizen of the United States at the time of adoption of this Constitution, comma, shall be eligible to the office of president. Now, the reason why that second part of the sentence was in there, in other words, only a natural-born citizen can be president, but if you were actually a citizen at the time of the adoption of the Constitution, then you can become president. The reason that they put that in there was because George Washington's parents were British citizens, and they wanted to make him president. John Adams' parents were British citizens, and they wanted to make him president. Thomas Jefferson's, I mean, these were our first three presidents. In fact, the same is true of Madison and Monroe. The first five presidents, all of them, their parents were British citizens, and so they were not natural-born citizens by the definition of that time, according to this Republican group, which is, you know, doing this literal read of the Constitution. And their argument actually seems relatively cogent. This is the National Federation of Republican Assemblies, NFRA. And the argument that they're making is that your parents must be citizens when you are born for you to be a, quote, natural-born citizen. And the only exception was for those first five presidents, and that exception is actually in the Constitution. Now, you know, they tried this with Obama. Although Trump, his birther thing, saying that Obama wasn't even a citizen, much less natural-born, kind of, you know, trumped, pardon the pun, that whole argument. And kind of, you know, so it just kind of got lost back in 2008. But this Republican group is reprising this argument, and they're taking it a step farther. Because at the time that Kamala Harris was born, apparently both her mother and her father were not yet naturalized U.S. citizens. They were here on green cards. And so they're saying she's not a natural-born citizen according to the Constitution. So that's their first argument. Then their second argument is that even if she were, it doesn't matter because her father was black. And black people can never be citizens because of the Dred Scott decision, which was never repealed by the Supreme Court. Now, Dred Scott was an African-American who lived, I believe he started in Missouri. I'd have to go back and look, but he was enslaved. And his owner was a guy who was in the U.S. Army. His owner took him to Minnesota, which was a free state, where Dred Scott became free. He continued to work for his owner. They apparently had a very good relationship. In fact, you know, there's some speculate that his owner, the guy who owned him, I don't have his name, actually helped finance the 5 lawsuits that Dred Scott, Mr. Scott, used. He had 3 state lawsuits and 2 federal lawsuits that took it all the way to the Supreme Court, right, to say that, hey, I was freed in Minnesota. But when they went back to Missouri, the Army sent them back to Missouri. Missouri said, oh, no, you're a slave again. And that produced Dred Scott's lawsuit. And in that decision, Chief Justice Roger Taney wrote, and it was a 7-2 decision, wrote that basically no black person can ever be a citizen of the United States. And so this Republican group, NFRA, the National Republican Federation, or the National, what is it? National Federation of Republican Assemblies. This group says that because of Dred Scott, Kamala Harris also is not a citizen of the United States, or at least a natural-born citizen, because her father could not have been a citizen because he was black. And they're literally quoting Dred Scott. They go on to say this was, you know, what they on their platform page, on their website, an originalist and strict constructionist understanding of the Constitution in the Scalia and Thomas tradition, as well as precedent-setting U.S. Supreme Court cases below, and one of the ones that they cite is Dred Scott, have found that a natural-born citizen is defined as a person born on American soil of parents who are both citizens of the United States at the time of the child's birth. And then they quote Dred Scott, the Dred Scott decision, and this is what Chief Justice Roger Taney wrote. He wrote, "The question is simply this. Can a Negro whose ancestors were imported into this country and sold as slaves become a member of the political community formed and brought into existence by the Constitution of the United States, and as such become entitled to the rights and privileges and immunities guaranteed by that instrument to that citizen, or to the citizen? The alien is excluded because being born in a foreign country, he cannot be a member of the community until he is naturalized. But why are the African race born in the state not permitted to share in one of the highest duties of the citizen? The answer is obvious. He is not, by the institutions and laws of the state, numbered among its people. He forms no part of the sovereignty of the state and is not, therefore, called upon to uphold and defend it." End of quote. So this is the Dred Scott decision, 1857, saying that black people are not citizens of the United States, never can be. Now, you could argue that that decision was repealed by the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, Section 2 of the 14th Amendment, which blows up the 3/5 provision. But the National Federation of Republican Assemblies is saying, oh, no, Dred Scott is still on the books, guys. And, I mean, and they got some serious people, you know, at least in the Republican Party, talking about this. Laura Loomer, you know, former Republican primary candidate for U.S. Congress, formerly associated with the Trump campaign. She laid out an extensive rant over on Twitter about Kamala's mother's immigration status. And then, you know, quoting, and then the New York Times had an article titled, "Trump Elevates False Fringe Attacks on Harris to Center of His Campaign." Their comments seemingly aimed at suggesting to black voters that the Democratic candidate does not represent them, and more broadly, planting the idea that Ms. Harris is inauthentic, helped turn what had been a trickle of such content into a gusher. Overnight, conservative corners of the internet, long fixated on Mr. Biden's age, swung to what looked to be their next target. Years-old video clips of Ms. Harris acknowledging her South Asian heritage found fresh currency, along with memes mocking her speaking style, and even a Billy Joel song modified to say she's not black or white, Indian or Jamaican. So here we have, Senator Rand Paul is, you know, an endorser of this. Rafael Cruz is the president of this group. This is Ted Cruz's dad. I mean, these people are not without some juice, right? You know, people are saying, oh, this is just a fringe group. Well, you know, they used to think that Tim McVeigh was a member of a fringe group. Tim McVeigh was, you know, traveled around the country for a year or two talking about the Great Replacement Theory. And everybody said, he's just crazy, until he blew up the building, you know, the federal building in Oklahoma City. And then guess what happened? His Great Replacement Theory became Republican doctrine. I mean, it's at the core of the Trump and Vance call for more white babies. Because, you know, those Jews are paying to cause black people to reproduce in large numbers, and they're importing brown people from other countries. I mean, you can laugh at it if you want. And it is, you know, this is a fringe group. It's not part of the official Republican Party, but they claim, you know, they call themselves Republicans. And there's a bunch of Republican officials, you know, former Republican officials in there, including, you know, former people who've held fairly high office in the United States. And, you know, you got Mike Huckabee, Kellyanne Conway, Rafael Cruz, Rand Paul, Michelle Bachmann, Pat Buchanan, Steve Forbes, Alan Keyes, Ken Blackwell, you know, but serious people who are endorsing this group or are members of this group, or in the case of Rafael Cruz even, you know, run this group, saying these things. And this is why I think it's so important that we just repudiate, just openly, explicitly repudiate this embrace of racism that has animated the Republican Party ever since Richard Nixon rolled out his white silent majority riff and his war on drugs to go against black people and hippies back in the day. What say you? I got to tell you about what happened in Arlington National Cemetery this week. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.